Oh, it's hard to take the temperature of it. I don't know. I mean, things seem worse to me. I mean, the moral confusion seems worse. I mean, if October 7th, the atrocities were so.
Sam Harris is a name that many people associate with bold ideas and no-holds-barred takes on some of the most controversial topics of our time. Known for his critical views on religion, politics, and culture, Harris has not shied away from expressing his thoughts on what's often called woke culture. And to say that he's critical of it is an understatement. Harris has been a vocal opponent of what he sees as the intellectual dangers of woke ideology, a term used to describe a set of progressive beliefs surrounding social justice, identity politics, and political correctness. But why is he so against it, and what exactly does he think is wrong with this movement?
It's long been a concern. We're at a disadvantage because it's easily framed as a tr- a symptom of our tribal solidarity to be taking the side of Israel in this particular conflict, right? Because as I think you know, my concern about Islam has had very little to do with Israel or Judaism. It's just, I mean, it's really.
It all starts with his view of the core principles that drive woke culture. According to Harris, the essence of woke ideology lies in its fixation on identity, specifically race, gender, and other social categories. In his opinion, this intense focus on identity is deeply problematic because it promotes division rather than unity. It encourages people to view others primarily through the lens of their race, gender, or sexuality, rather than as individuals. The problem, Harris argues, is that this creates a culture where people are judged by the most superficial aspects of their identity, rather than their actual behavior or character. In this world, people are often grouped into categories of oppressor and oppressed, and those labels are more important than anything else.
Where it continually gets spun back to, you're a mere defense of Israel and a mere concern about anti-Semitism, right? I mean, we can do more to tease those strands apart in this conversation, I think, but because I think anti-Semitism, now is a real concern in a way that perhaps it has always been, but I have just lost sight of it. But my concern about Islamism and
Harris' critique doesn't stop there. He also believes that woke culture fosters an atmosphere of moral absolutism, where there is little room for nuance or disagreement. For him, the danger of this is that it creates an environment where people are either with you or against you. There's no room for dialogue, self-reflection, or understanding of different perspectives. In Harris's view, this can easily slip into a form of intellectual tyranny, where people are punished or ostracized for expressing opinions that fall outside the accepted narrative. He uses the term cancel culture to describe this phenomenon, a social mechanism by which people are publicly shamed, ostracized, or even professionally destroyed for holding views that go against the woke orthodoxy.
It's remarkable
Um,
for her
yeah.
prose.
And she recently,
If people don't know what people might not know what I'm referring to, but she is famously the most muddled writer in the English language. I mean, you can read paragraphs of her and it's just synonymous with brain damage. Every sentence is doing you harm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can only hope.
Now, to be clear, Harris is not against progress. He has long been a supporter of civil rights, equality, and social justice. What bothers him is the method by which woke culture approaches these issues. He sees it as counterproductive to the very ideals it purports to champion. For example, Harris criticizes the emphasis on safe spaces and trigger warnings in academia, which he believes stifles free speech and intellectual growth. He argues that in a society where open debate and the free exchange of ideas are crucial to solving complex problems, the policing of language and ideas only serves to inhibit progress rather than foster it.
Someone is about what specific words and sentences mean. I mean, so if someone says in response to a questionnaire in the UK that they want to live under Sharia law, do they really know what they mean when they say yes to that, right? I mean, some clearly do, but
But the critique doesn't end there. Harris has also pointed out the way woke culture seems to lack a sense of proportion. In his view, it's easy to get lost in moral outrage over relatively trivial issues, while avoiding the much larger, more complex issues that require serious attention. For instance, he believes that people who are hyper-focused on gender-neutral pronouns or microaggressions might be missing the point when it comes to issues like poverty, education, or health care. Harris feels that these more pressing concerns are often overshadowed by a preoccupation with ideological purity and social justice signaling.
If they were really forced to confront the specifics, might in fact, pull back from the brink and realize that they didn't mean what they thought they meant. But apart from that, it's a totally sociopathic skewing of.
For Harris, the problem also lies in how the woke movement tends to attack the very institutions that are responsible for the progress we've made as a society. He's particularly critical of how many in the woke movement view the Western Enlightenment traditions, which are rooted in reason, individual rights, and the scientific method, as inherently oppressive. Harris, a staunch advocate of reason and scientific inquiry, finds this especially troubling. He argues that rejecting the Enlightenment ideals that gave rise to modern democracy, human rights, and scientific progress leads us down a dangerous path. In his mind, this rejection doesn't just threaten the progress of liberal values but could potentially undo much of what we've gained over the past few centuries.
And raped and tortured and murdered the precise number of teenagers and young men and women peacefully dancing there. And then they should have, found the precise number of families and tied them together and burned them alive, and et cetera, raped the same number of people. Who thinks that would have been an ethically wise and acceptable response to the atrocities?
But perhaps one of Harris's most provocative critiques is about how woke culture deals with issues of race. He's often criticized for taking a colorblind approach, which he argues is not about ignoring race but about trying to treat everyone equally, regardless of their skin color. Harris believes that by constantly emphasizing race and identity, the woke movement actually exacerbates racial division. He argues that instead of fostering unity, this focus on race creates a sense of perpetual grievance, where people are more concerned with what divides them than with what unites them. In his view, this emphasis on race in discussions of justice only leads to resentment and division, rather than reconciliation and understanding.
At this point, those deaths are the causal sequence you have to understand that accounts for those deaths starts with Hamas using its non-combatants.
One of the most controversial aspects of Harris's stance on woke culture is his view on free speech. To him, free speech is foundational to any functioning democracy, and he believes that woke culture's obsession with censoring people or ideas that are seen as offensive is not only harmful but ultimately self-destructive. He argues that the overzealous policing of language, whether it's through cancel culture, deplatforming, or social media shaming, undermines the very foundation of an open society. Without free speech, Harris warns, we risk turning into a society where dissent is not tolerated, where people are silenced not because they're wrong, but because they don't conform to the prevailing ideological orthodoxy. For Harris, the ability to express controversial or unpopular opinions is crucial for the survival of liberal democracy. Censorship, in his eyes, is a slippery slope that leads to totalitarianism.
But any call for a ceasefire has to start with the sentences that acknowledge the hostages taken by Hamas, and it has to call for a release of those hostages as the proximate cause.
Another key aspect of Harris's critique centers around the concept of moral superiority that he believes many woke activists display. He often points out how some people within the movement adopt a self-righteous attitude, seeing themselves as morally superior to others. This moral elitism, Harris argues, breeds a toxic atmosphere where any dissent or disagreement is met with immediate accusations of bigotry or hatred. This, according to Harris, ultimately undermines the very moral principles that the woke movement claims to uphold. By shutting down debate and labeling opponents as evil, it doesn't allow for growth or real change to take place.
The thing that's giving it topspin for so many people, the fact that you have all of these people focused on this conflict, of all the world's conflicts, they're focused on this conflict on an hourly basis. Where are all the protests about what the Russians are doing in Ukraine right now? I mean, why aren't our college campuses?
So, where does all of this leave us? According to Sam Harris, the solution isn't to abandon the principles of social justice or equality, it's to reject the dogmatic, divisive, and intolerant aspects of woke culture. Harris believes that we need to engage in thoughtful, open dialogue about these issues, rather than reducing complex problems to simplistic narratives of good versus evil. He calls for a return to rational discourse, where we can discuss difficult topics without fear of being silenced or ostracized. In his ideal world, we would strive for a society where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin or the gender they identify with.
Just,
Mhm.
it's not happening. And the fact that it's not happening says a lot about the bizarre status of Jews in kind of the political imaginations of much of humanity.
Yeah, I do it and I expected it. But to see it in the West, it honestly did surprise me.
But ultimately, Harris's critique of woke culture is not just about pointing out its flaws, it's about reminding us of the ideals that should guide us in the fight for a more just and equal world. In his eyes, those ideals are rooted in reason, individual rights, and the free exchange of ideas. If we lose sight of these values in our rush to be woke, we risk undermining the very progress we seek to make.
And they manipulate it and then they